it. You know what I mean? It's like, it kind of, I think we have to look at aesthetics, particularly as we start building
I
up.
think it's all
As we
about.
start building up our mountain, I think it's unreasonable to think that there's gonna be a 12-foot wall in the backyard to look at. I think it's
So-
unreasonable.
What if we turn it around and say, what if it's on your own yard, in your own backyard? So in my yard right now, if I was to put one wall behind my house, it would be 13 feet tall. Before it hits from my backyard, and then it hits the natural slope above. So I would be the only one looking at it.
So then there's no aesthetical, there's no downside to that. I wouldn't have any objection to that.
So, but therein lies the
Yeah,
whole
but
issue.
that's the
So I
problem.
think Commissioner
We
Wade-
keep looking at saying, when we build these walls, we're impeding on a neighbor, and that's only.
But we do that when we build those walls of the structure. That's why we have setbacks, right? And so, you know, from your, even if you built that wall, if you're on the downhill side, your visual setback, I mean, it's still, there's no visual impairment to your neighbor because they'd be on the uphill side.
Chairman Thomas,
Yeah,
one of the concerns I've had as we talked about this as a council is that as the ordinance sits right now, you can build a 12-foot wall, but if you build a terraced rock wall in front of it and cover 4 feet, now that counts because we've changed where we're measuring the exposed piece. Essentially what the ordinance says is you can't have more than 8 feet that's exposed. So I
correct.
have a 12-foot wall, and if I build as you pointed out to us in the council meeting, if I build a rock wall that's set 4 feet away from that concrete wall and terraced correctly, I can still build a 12-foot wall that is just as big an impediment to the visual landscaping of my downstream or downhill neighbor, but now it's legal because I covered 4 feet of it.
But because of that, but Mr. Swan, or what are you? Mr. Swanson, Councilman Swanson, but you'd have to have a setback in order to get that wall, that 4-foot hill. or whatever.
You're absolutely right, but a 4-foot setback with a 12-foot concrete wall is not going to change the visual impediment created to the downhill neighbor very meaningfully. A 12-foot wall that's right on the line versus, I mean, if you look at the wall that's in question that kind of brought this all up, if that were moved back 4 feet, it isn't going to change the view. But we can move it back 4 feet, cover 4 feet of it, and still have a 12-foot wall. And the question that I asked, and am still asking is, would shrubbery, every time I say that, I have to giggle in a Monty Python kind of way. Would shrubs that are on, you know, like there's the wall in question has 2 feet between the wall and the actual property line, plenty of room to put shrubs. If the person building the wall is willing to put those shrubs and the downhill neighbor's okay with it, what's the problem?
Well, I guess the question I have is, sounds like that's what the applicant's willing to do. And if that's in compliance with Scott, you're saying it's not in compliance. I guess we gotta figure that out because
A shrub is not in compliance. A wall covering part of the wall is.
I think the applicant would have to grade his backyard to come up to a point to meet the wall at a certain point.
Yeah.
And so now he's the applicant, so not really the applicant's neighbor, I think. I don't know why, but you know, he's now going to go from a level yard to a graded yard simply to accommodate his neighbors.
Or to a wall.
Or, yeah, to his neighbor's wall.
So.
But in this case,
Come back 4 feet.
Push it back.
So that's why it doesn't.
And in this case, this one's even more difficult. This is why I think we've got to think bigger because both these people want this wall, and you know, and the applicant, or at least the gentleman that gave us spoke to the planning commission, has talked about the ways he would design it and things that would sound really cool and would work for him. And you know, I'm not objecting that would be a nice thing for him. I do think, however, the vast majority of the city wouldn't want that on the property line at that big. I really think that.
And I think that's the most important point that we've talked about in all of these discussions is that, we're here, it was prompted by this particular situation, but we really have to look at what fits the entire city in an ordinance that can be enforced uniformly.
Including people like Eric. I mean, we can't have an ordinance that would limit Eric's ability to build a wall out his backyard that would only impact him, right? I mean,
You'd have to terrace it.
which would be silly if it was the only one impacted by it.
I think another thing that was inferred in previous discussions is, and it was just stated, but probably needs to be unpackaged a little bit more, is just the pragmatic element of the planning commission or residents to be able to administer this. Like, if we create such a detailed, set of rules that puts so much work on our planning commission, we're trying to solve a problem and we're creating another problem at the same time at taxpayer burden. This is an important thing to solve for the parties at hand, but we can't make something that's so complicated that it ends up being cost prohibitive for the city to continue to administer. That's just not common sense.
I think Scott had a.
Yeah, but there's a clarification in the way the ordinance is written that under tiered retaining walls, tiered walls must be separated horizontally by a distance that exceeds the largest adjacent wall height. So it's not, in this particular case,
But that's where
You
we
couldn't
need to
go-
fix that.
yeah, so you couldn't go like
That's not-
4 up, 4 over, and then 8 up, and it even says, which this seems like it was explicit at the time, tiered walls with a horizontal separation less than this are not permitted, even though they may be engineered and stable. So at the time when this was discussed, it was likely discussed, or this is like, this happens, this may have been language that was adopted from another city. I don't know exactly this part, but in this case, whatever the tallest section of showing wall is, that's the amount of separation that you'd have to have. In the particular instance that we're talking about, there isn't room enough to terrace this 4 feet up and even 4 feet over. You have a pretty limited amount of space between that and the exposed portion of this wall. Now that's something we can tackle. We could just say tiered walls need to be separated by a distance at least as tall as the lower portion of wall, or you could phrase that in a
Yeah, I
number of
think
ways.
all the discussion that we've had, that's the way, of all the drawings that have been put on the board and everything, that's always been the way it's been explained is the bottom wall, however tall that wall is, you terrace back from the same distance as the height of that wall.
Yeah.
To create a one-to-one slope from bottom of wall and bottom of wall.
Mhm.
And so that language that's in there is kind of no big deal.
I'm gonna share a couple more thoughts and I'm gonna be quiet because I'm talking too much here, but I think the purpose of any, many of our ordinances, when it comes to height, is to preserve, not really so much of a view, I guess it is the view, and we always talk about the view around here, okay? But it's to preserve that feeling of open space. And that's what a wall does when it's on a property line. It creates a sense of confinement instead of open space. And so I feel like this is the same thing as a building setback. It's a preservation of open space. And if that is set back far enough from the property line, I'm actually okay with a very tall wall as long as it's engineered. But when it's on a property line, I think it creates a sense of confinement, and therefore I oppose higher than 8 feet. And I'm going to let you guys talk, and I'm welcome to open other opinions. Obviously, there's very valid opinions in this room, because I can't disagree with what these guys want. I feel like it's going to be, and I don't know if you guys are together. I've heard from you. And he sounds very valid. He's like, hey, I'm going to hold some paint Christmas lights on this wall, and it's going to be cool. And he's got enough room that it really would be cool. And I think fine for him to have that wall there. But for most people, I don't think it is.
I think that's a.
Chairman Thomas.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I continue to be concerned about is how we're measuring the wall. It's like the 35-foot, that keeps being referenced to on a home being built. We don't measure that from the lowest absolute point on the property, right? We've changed the standards in how we measure that. Because if you look at some of the homes that are built up on the hill, especially a couple of the very large ones, if we measure the height of the home from the lowest point on the property owned, they're well in excess of 35 feet. But we recognize that that can't be the measuring point. Just a little bit to the west of the wall that has initiated this discussion is a wall that failed recently. And when Scott, when you and I went and looked at that wall, it was very clear that that wall exceeded 8 feet, but that some kind of a little berm had been built up on the bottom of it and some rocks stacked on it. It was neither terraced, but it was high. It wasn't terraced in any way, shape, or form. It was high enough to bury enough of the visible wall to get to the 8 feet. And that's a brand new home, and it was passed on inspection and given final occupancy. So we have to think about, okay, how are we measuring the wall? And we can't say in one instance, in my mind, well, you can stack 2 or 3 feet of dirt up against the bottom of the exposed concrete, stack some pretty granite rocks on it, and then measure 8 feet, when in actuality, if we measure the height of that wall from the grade of the downhill neighbor's backyard, it exceeds 8 feet. So where are we making this measurement? Right now, it feels very arbitrary. And arbitrary gets us in trouble and is very hard to enforce. If we can come up with some way to have that is less arbitrary in how we're making this measurement and what we're counting is covering the bottom, I'm okay. I don't have a thing about super high walls, although Scott, you and I did take a short tour of the city, and there are numerous walls that have been built within the last 7, 8 years that are well in excess of 8 feet, well in excess. And there's not been a single complaint by the city, downhill residents, or anything else. So part of me wonders, are we creating a problem that doesn't exist? Those are the questions in my mind.
Since Brandon is done talking, I look at this, I'm actually going to agree with him, which we don't do very often, but I live on a corner, and the reason that I can't put an 8-foot fence all the way to my corner line is for view, right? So that people stopping at the stop sign can look up the street. And so I look at this as a vertical representation of that rule, right? This is affecting, if somebody was up against that 10-foot, that spot, right, 10 feet out of their backyard or whatever. However, it's not 10 feet. What is it to the backyard or side yard, 10 feet? Then there's a 13-foot wall there. That's really going to impede your view. And so my thoughts there are just, first of all, I think that the wall should be measured from the footing, but I'm speaking out of, I had to try and remember what a footing, what that name was. I think it should be measured from the footing, but I also think that if we push those walls back, if you want to have a flat yard, I can completely understand that. And if it takes a 13-foot wall to do that, that's fine, as long as it's back whatever distance, half the distance of the wall, a quarter distance of the wall, a full distance of the wall, whatever that is that we determine gives that downhill neighbor a little bit of view. That would be my input there.
So you're talking about like terracing that wall,
Either terracing it or
So it's a
just
gradual-
pushing it back. Yeah,
which
I
is, I
mean,
think, what our ordinance allows for now, isn't
The
it?
terracing, yes. So
Right.
let's, let's pause our discussion right now, since we seem to keep going back and forth with the applicant that's brought it, and let's let the applicant address this. We have a little bit more fodder and material to talk about. And see, really, as this one brings it up, the applicant here has retaining wall. Mr. D, are you addressing this?
Yeah, I would hope so. First of all,
State your name and address.
So you may want to sit at the table over here, because this does
I
have a
wanna look at their
working mic.
face.
No, I don't know that
You
YouTube won't pick up your voice.
Can we move the podium over?
We can try.
If it's picking up our, Scott, if it's picking up our
No,
voice. what is-
this is
He's right there.
Yeah, it might, yeah, we'll try it out.
I'm closer. So,
We do need your name.
Brad D, DEE, 551 East, 3825 North. The city council can attest, we are there for a small duration and then we're out again. So it's kind of a big deal for us. In fact, my wife can't even sleep at night. She's just beside herself. She's not here tonight because emotionally she can't do it anymore with the problems we've had. But let me just explain to you, there's some things in the minutes that you were given in the minutes that are not they're not true, but it wasn't in a devious way. Scott and I have met several times, and we have several things that we've talked about. Number one is I'm going to meet your ordinance regardless of how I do it. So don't worry about that. Scott and I talked about the fact that I don't need a retaining wall. I've got a little over 2 feet right above the bottom of the wall. And I'm going to put stone on the wall or keystone like he's got over his yard. I love it. I'm going to take care of this. I've already given the city $3,500 to say I am going to take care of it. But then I'm really struggling with some of the things that were said, which impinge my integrity. One of the things that you were told by the city administrator is that I knew full well of the ordinance and I violated it willingly. I would never do that, ever. You have to understand that we lived in St. George. We hired a contractor. We bought the property while we lived in St. George. Understand this is in the middle of COVID. So we come up and buy the property and employ a contractor. Great contractor, I love him. He did a great job with the house. They dug the footings for that property and they put them in. I have no idea what they're doing. I am a homeowner that has no clue about what this wall is going to do, other than the fact that I'm trying to meet your ordinance. They have the step down footings in that wall. They each fall down about 3 feet. The only portion of this wall that's out of compliance is the part that's on this neighbor's property. The rest of it is stepped down at less than 8 feet. In fact, it starts at 2 feet and comes down to 8 feet and then goes along at 8 feet. And then because of the lay of the property, it goes down to 11 feet something. Okay. I will take the responsibility for omission on this, but I had no idea.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
So are you saying that wall, and I've seen it, but I didn't obviously measure it.
Sure.
That's a creep through your backyard. So are you saying that that wall is 8 feet, but the property goes to where the maximum height of it is 11 feet? Is that?
That's correct. My wall is, and that's why I stepped it down on the edges.
So the edges of those are 8 feet.
The one edges. Now, that's why I say mine is a thing of omission. We lived in Star Valley, Wyoming in our cabin, all the while this was being built, because we had no other residents. We were legal residents of Wyoming at a particular time while we waited for this house to be built. I couldn't be here every second and measure things. I had 2 engineers do this wall.
Let me ask you why, let me clarify why I asked that question as you speak here. I'm interested in getting people what they want. Residents, 100% of the residents that have spoke about this ordinance have been you two, so in favor of what you guys want. And so I'm interested in crafting an ordinance that would get you guys that, to show my hand here, okay? However, I'm leery of doing that at the expense of, future residents.
Sure.
So
And I certainly understand.
that's why I'm asking details about it, because if there's some way we could craft the ordinance that is good for the goose and the ganders as well, then I'd be interested in pursuing it.
So Brad, you turned responsibility over to the builder, right? In this.
Mayor, I understand. It's my omission.
No, but you rely on the builder. I mean.
Sure.
believe me.
Yeah.
I signed it. I paid the 8,000 and I signed it.
So, Scott, you can verify this, but someone said that the plans, and this would be the builder's responsibility. It was indicated that it couldn't be that size of wall. Is that correct on the plans?
Correct. On the building plans, it's noted that at completion, no more than 8 feet of wall will be visible.
Okay, and that's what I learned. And when I learned that, Mayor, you and I were on the phone 15 minutes later, as you remember, because I didn't know that. And I apologize for that, but I take full responsibility that I'm the landowner. And I bought it, and I employed the contractor. And I signed the permit that we could do it. But I don't read engineers. That's why I had 2 engineers do it. Gardner Engineering and Nate. Come on, help me. Nate that designs homes. The builder in North Park. Anyway. Karras, thank you. Nate Karras. He engineered it and so did Gardner Engineering. I put so much rebar into that you wouldn't believe it. Twice what I needed to put. I put Deadman every 20 feet. I made them do it so it would hold in a major earthquake because I've been studied earthquake in my job for years. Well, he's an engineer. I even asked him what we should do. I was under the impression that we would try to light it up so it fly. Yeah. Oh, he doesn't cool things. I will. I was trying to step down to a place where it would be the 8 feet across. And when it was poured, I even told my neighbors that don't let those forms fool you because they don't have to pour to the top of the form. I mean, they often do that. They pour lower. And when that wall was stripped, it was in that particular portion of his yard, it was too far. Okay, so I say, what do I need to do to the city, to the mayor, to the council? I've had the councilman to my house. I've looked at the wall. I've agreed to do anything I possibly could. And I think the council has been fantastic. And Scott, I have to say that I really appreciate your willingness to help me. He has been great. I wasn't excited about getting my water turned off twice in 24 hours because I didn't evidently qualify to be temporary. What do you call it? Temporary occupants. That's it. I thought temporary occupancy, and again, my fault. I take complete responsibility. I thought it meant I could move my stuff in and work, because I do a lot of my own work on the inside of the house. I finished it. And I thought that's what it meant, but it didn't. So now we have a situation where I would like to work out anything I possibly could. Now, Scott and I, in our last conversations, and you can shut me off in 10 minutes, but we're still going to discuss it. But Scott and I, in our conversations, kind of agreed, Scott, I'm not speaking for you, okay, that I don't need another retaining wall. I've got a retaining wall that's engineered, I'll bet you, any other wall in this city is engineered better and poured better. 120 cubic yards of cement is a lot of cement to pour in a wall. And with all that rebar, that wall's never going anywhere. Sometimes I wish I'd have done drop wall, but now it's not. But I'm willing to do a lot of things to make that thing work. And so in our conversation, I need to put something against the wall. And not a retaining wall, but as a, what would we call it? It would be, Scott, what have we talked about?
It would just be raising.
Landscape.
Yeah, raising the average grade essentially.
Yeah, it's just a landscape. I could put Keystone block. I could put the rock that matches my house, which is quite expensive, but I'd be willing to try that if I could.
Keystone's not cheaper.
I have looked at houses in this city, and I have a packet for each one of you. I don't expect you to look at it tonight. There are 40-foot walls in this city, straight up, nothing on the bottom, just straight up. Some were built within the last year and a half, straight up. Some were block, 8-inch block. You know how many 8-inch block it takes to get 30 feet? A lot. But you know where these are, you've seen them. And so here I am trying to work with this city council, and they've been very good with it, but I'm still trying to work in the city to make mine in compliance. Well, I see across the street from my house at the top of 575, a house that's got an 11-foot wall that's a retaining wall. They park the downhill neighbors park their trailer there, and the house above them has an 11-foot wall. They've had an occupancy permit since the day they built the house and never had a person from the city say a thing about it. The house and my neighbors, these are great people whose wall fell down. I fell down. I have great feeling for them. I don't think it was engineered correctly. Neither do they, by the way. And it wasn't nearly engineered. That wall, before it went down, and I have to say with Councilman Swanson, I measured that wall. And even with the covering, it was 10.5 feet on the east side. But it went down. That was a structural thing. But you know what? They had a building, an occupancy permit, and no one said a thing from the city. But for some reason, all of a sudden, this wall has become the focal point. You know what I'm knowing about in my ward? The wall guy. I'm not exactly happy about it. I'd like to be known as D. And so we're trying to figure out a way that I can help with my neighbor. Christy she has a portion of the wall that's like about 8 feet until it starts to dip right at his property line. I've agreed that we're gonna plant bushes all the way along that wall because she loves lilacs or whatever she wants. And I'm gonna help her do it. I just did her whole sprinkler system a few weeks ago so we could water it. I'm willing to put something on that wall to help him. If I need to put keystone like he's got in the rest of his yard, I'll try to do that.
So what, can you help, is your wall on the property line? Or?
No, it's a little over, it's 2 feet 2 inches back.
Okay.
So I could put, to be honest with you, I'm sorry, let me just finish it. To be honest with you, as I've seen houses around this city, I could put railroad ties there. And he wouldn't have a thing to say about it. But you know what? He's more important to me than railroad ties. Because there are houses around the city that have done just that. And I'm trying to comply. So I'm gonna work with him. And my last thought is I'm gonna put another $20,000 into that wall that cost me about $100,000 to build, just so I can have good neighbors. But give me some help here. Now, don't let me be in violation of another one. Make it so we can work together to make it work on this one. And can I show one picture? This is the coolest thing. Let me show you this.
Yeah,
And I'm gonna leave these packets with you. You can look at all these pictures. They're so cool about these giant walls. This picture right here.
You know, you do have to read the pictures, you know, that additional.
Oh,
Okay.
I'll make you tons of them. Okay, this is what I had proposed to do with the city. They are the prettiest. You've seen these things. They're beautiful. And I was gonna put them so thick, right along that with my neighbors, that you'd never see the wall and the 3.5 feet that I need to cover. I don't want to do any of this stuff. And I would love to beautify that wall. But only 2 feet is mine. So how can I fall within the thing without costing another $50,000? I'm into that house during COVID. $400,000 more than it was quoted to us. $400,000. I don't have house loans. I don't take loans. But I've saved for 25 years for this home.
Well, thank you for your comments. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. B?
Thank you for sharing.
No, I'm gonna pitch some ideas that may be bad, okay, but in the interest of throwing some stuff out there. Yeah, go ahead. Sure. I'm gonna let you know I have a thought in a minute.
As we've listened to the applicant, let's open up if there's any other public that would like to comment on this. We'll continue our discussion. Step up to the center of the corral.
Or you can go to my phone if you want.
I can talk about it. I was trying to take notes, I guess, talking, but I think, because basically this guy, oh, sorry, Chris Pulver, lived next to him. Anyway, 3739 North, 575 East, all brick house, lots of Keystone, obviously. And the overall problem that you guys face is the fact that as you go uphill, and there's lots of new developments, that I hike, I mean, 100 East, I mean, if you want to the bottom to the top, that's a good workout. Same thing with a new thing that's just to the west of us, bottom to top, holy cow. So, I mean, you're dropping 40 feet, if not more, bottom to the lot, to the top of the lot. Anybody that buys on the bottom side, they're fine, but if you buy on the top side, then you have someone that's gonna buy that next one up, and no more view. I don't care, you were talking about views, you're done. If you do a terraced wall, you're looking at weeds, gopher heads poking up every once in a while. Cement wall, same thing, you're not gonna see anything either way, doesn't matter what kind of wall it is. Height wise, you know, I mean, you have a big house in front of you. I see some people over to the east of us that literally just made a little like hobbit town in the back because they can't see anything. You know, and that's the effect when you have streets, you know, one here, is you're always gonna have a house over, anyway. But coming to a height, how do you figure out what height to put in the ordinance, or none at all? You know, I kind of was just looking at stuff. I mean, I think everybody's kind of not stuck with, but kind of agreeing to 8. And I'm trying to get my thing, there we go. Is that, for all types of walls, I think the biggest thing is, there has to be engineering, period. You know, I don't care. So, I mean, right away, the type of wall that you're talking about has to be engineered. I mean, the height of the wall, you know, one more thing before I get too far, is that the downhill neighbors are kind of the key people, because they have to live with the looks. If the uphill neighbors can't get to the retaining wall, I mean, I don't know if you took any pictures of some of the crappy rock walls, no offense, but they just don't get administered to, you know. How do you weed 4-foot rocks trying to, you know, you carabine down, or what is that carabine, but rope down to get to them? I mean, I think, to me, rock wall is very hard to keep aesthetically pleasing to the downhill neighbor, because uphill neighbor, I don't see it. Let's see, so, and then when you have walls, you know, they'll put fences on top of walls. You know, is that something in consideration as well? Because you could have an 8-foot wall and a 4-foot fence. I mean, I guess the question is really, if it's not engineering and it's aesthetics, fine, pick 8 feet and then have a waiver process or something in front of, maybe. Anytime you put a waiver system, you're constantly getting neighbors showing up and saying, but put it in there that you have to have concurrence of the 4 neighbors around you. Yes, it does pass it down to the next people, but somebody buying the house is gonna know that there's a wall there. And they have to buy the wall too, technically, you know? So to me, I think the biggest thing is when you're talking about height, then, you know, when you're going uphill, especially for, you know, some of these people, it's a must, or you can have a 4-foot backyard, because you have to terrace it 3 or 4 times to be in compliance. So, in conclusion, I think the biggest thing is like you're saying, is the aesthetics. And if you don't have concurrence with the neighbors, and you know, then you can't do it. You know, and Brad's been awesome. I mean, from the get-go, said, let's get going. Let's build something huge, because between the neighbors, I don't like fences, but in this condition, the way it was, it's perfect. And I don't know how to even describe to you why I think it's awesome, but it is. And I've watched it go up. I understand building keystone
I
walls.
think it's awesome because it gives you a very private backyard,
Yeah.
kind of.
Well, I mean, it's like,
I've seen
I don't even see this guy, you know, that's, I don't, you know, he's up there in his parapet up in this, down at us with his telescope, and I wonder why, pointing toward the bedroom, but I don't know.
Oh, wait a minute, that's a different project.
That's why.
It's harder to build a wall.
Yeah, I'm trying to block it off. So, he's worked with us, we love him to death, he and his wife, I mean, they're great, so, but you guys have the hard choices, I gave you some options there and there, but, questions?
Questions? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner comments? We have Nate Davis from our
That's really
staff who's raised his hand to speak at times, right?
Okay. Nate?
Hey, everybody. I'm missing a hot dinner to listen to you, so I'm going to be fast. but we've already had one concrete retaining wall this year that we've made them cut it because they were too tall. They stopped a lot of their job because of much like the arguments that have already happened, we had at the same time as this wall, and it ended up getting cut. It was 14 feet tall on a uphill lot, and it got cut. It's a Mason Cove lot 15. We've had another one that was just built without a permit on another lot. It's hasn't been approved or anything of that matter. So it's not just this Stonecrest lot that's had a problem. We have a lot of retaining wall problems, and trying to inspect the ordinance as you guys talked. We got to be able to enforce something. We recommend as an inspector that it's easier to enforce, and just understand that like in Northview lot that was discussed that failed, nobody asked or said, hey, which house got built first, and did the other guy undercut that wall, and now it's quite a bit taller and exposed, right? We got to remember what station it was built, how it was built, and try to do our best from there. In the Stonecrest lot, Gardner Engineering provided us a detail with top of wall and bottom of wall measurements, and none of those were met on Stonecrest lot 9 and 10. And that's a Mac builder who's built the wall. They're the ones that got that to us. So we're just trying to fulfill the ordinance that we have, and we're struggling a lot in these items. We try to get them approved through planning and the building department for the structural ability and for planning for that they're going to comply with the ordinance. And then we get a little bit beat up when somebody doesn't want to comply. And so whatever you decide tonight, let's try to make it somehow enforceable.
He may have not.
Yeah.
You guys are the ones he's talking about. Yeah.
Mr. Davis, this is Commissioner Nancaro. I had a couple of questions. The ordinance as currently written, it seemed like, I'm guessing 2 years ago, the city engineer came before us because of all of the construction that was going on up the hillside. And we had a whole presentation. And this is kind of why we came up with some of the current ordinance that's in place now. A couple of questions that came up is, the ordinance as written now, are you unable to enforce it? Or it's just that people aren't complying? Or, I mean, as it's written, is it enforceable?
It can be enforceable, but here's the honest truth, ma'am, is we don't have the guts always to enforce it. Somebody bullies and we comply. And we say, oh, here you go, you're okay. I mean, if Eric wanted to build his 13-foot retaining wall, he could, and somebody would go complain, and they could come back and say, hey, we want to keep this. And we don't have the guts to say, this is our ordinance. This is what we've done to other lots. Like, for example, Mason Cove cut their retaining wall. And they lost their sale because they couldn't get that retaining of that hillside taken care of appropriately per the ordinance. And so if we've already enforced it, why are we gonna try to change now? It's enforceable as it's written. The interpretation, we can get as detailed and go through a rabbit hole as we want, or try to train and educate those that have to enforce it to be as close to the same as possible.
So you really just need backup to be able to enforce it. You need
Correct.
support. And the other question that came up is where a wall is measured from top to bottom. Is it clear to you in the ordinance on how that is measured?
The ordinance says final grade. And so that's going to be, there's a little bit of interpretation in there, especially if you have a side hill with a downhill lot. So maybe the rear corners are different elevations. And so And that's determined whether if it's the front of a house for a front setback height or a back retaining wall. Most of the time that's taken by an average. And we have to remember that a lot of these walls, most walls, almost all walls built, we call it frost coverage in the building department, but they have to have enough dirt that frost can't come up and heave that wall. So there's going to be a little bit of a hill on them no matter what.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, any other public comments? Anything, Scott?
Nope.
All right.
Other hands raised. Wait, hold it.
Well, we'll go ahead and have our, continue our discussion now amongst the commissioners and council.
I have a
Chairman.
No, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah,
Hey, this is JD Dalpas. So one thing I think we talked about in the city council discussion a few weeks ago, I can't remember who had the concern, but if we allow, just going back to shrubbery or bushes or landscaping, some of the concern around that, if that is what we decide helps better this situation, is that it's hard to enforce that in the long term. You know, so let's say that they put shrubbery in and it looks great. It's going to be, we already have a hard time keeping up with code enforcement as it is as a city. And so we would be concerned that, you know, that might be a Band-Aid that helps fix this temporarily, but then 10 years down the road, did those shrubs keep up, and is it then exposed and we're back to square one? So that was kind of my thought. And then just overall, I'm just kind of thinking of this overall as a city, that this is more of a visual thing for me. For me, it's more a visual appearance of 8 feet being as high as we should allow. I do agree with Councilman Swanson that it is very tough to determine that 8 feet, where that starts. The example of the home where the wall failed and fell over, it appears that, you know, the majority of it is that 8 foot, but it's because there was this, you know, kind of dreadful little berm that was put up with a few large landscaping rocks to try to make it to the ordinance. So anyways, just some of my thoughts.
Okay.
I just want to make a comment, Mr. Chairman. You won't hear much from me tonight. I feel like I have somewhat of a conflict because I have a lot that's going to have a wall built on it. So not that I'm not interested, but I'm just trying not to have what I would call in my mind a perceived conflict. So you won't hear much from me.
Commissioner Mason.
Okay, let's hypothetically say that somebody has a 5-acre lot. Okay, and right in the middle of, and it's a big hill. And right in the middle of it, they want to put a 15-foot wall. Does anyone find any offense to that? Probably not. So I'm wondering what we really care about is, again, every comment I make is not on structure. I'm not going to talk, I don't know enough about that to talk about it. It's aesthetics. Okay. So what do we care about is perception from the neighbor right next door. So if 8 feet, if we say whatever our standard is, I don't know what the number is going to be 8 feet for my hypothetics or my solution here, but if I would suggest, I don't know how to write this in legalese here, but I would say that an 8-foot wall, 8 feet would need to be the maximum height that the wall could be from the neighbor that it abuts. But from my perception, so in other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is, if someone wanted to build a wall in the middle of their property, let it be 15 feet. It's not offending anyone. If Eric says, hey, I want to build a wall and it's got to be 13 feet, and it's going to be right out my back door, and my neighbor's going to look right over the top of it. Okay. And he said the same thing. Hey, it really matters the downhill neighbor. So could we put, I'm wondering, could we put in the ordinance that it's an 8-foot maximum from the perception of the neighbor's property line or something like that? And in this case, in the situation that's before us right now, that would work as long as Mr. Over owned the wall, right? But he doesn't. But could Mr. Pulver?
Get you 4 feet of property.
So, but really, if the property line were moved over 4 feet, right? So I told you this is gonna be a good and a terrible idea at the same time.
You said terrible.
You did warn us.
Okay, but well, I'm trying to come to something that makes everyone happy and not just the applicants of this thing we're kind of talking about, but also future people like Eric that want to put a big wall.
Just to
internally.
be clear, I don't want to I'm not gonna put a 30-foot wall.
Okay,
He's
I'm
just
just
saying
saying
you
I
could.
could.
but there's somebody who would want
Even
to.
be seen by anybody.
Okay, so what we want to do is enforce standards that everybody wants, right? The general population wants. And I do believe that most people living downhill would go, oh my gosh, my neighbor's building just up the hill from me, and I'm gonna have this damn 15-foot wall that I have to look at every day, and I'm gonna have to pay butterflies on it or something to even, or else I'm not gonna be able to sleep at night. That will happen if we.
At the
Go ahead.
same time, though, I think of Mason Cove's a great example.
Mhm,
You turn it up into Mason Cove, you've got a 65-foot house.
mhm.
And the front of it, sure, maybe is 20, but like,
Mhm.
so what's, if you're living below that and they build that behind you, they could have 65 feet of exposed home behind you. You're not gonna see anything anyway.
But it's not 2 feet off the neighbor's property line,
It's true.
which
But
it
still,
always is.
it's gonna block the view.
And so I would suggest our ordinance has something with, you know, if it's internal, in other words, if you build a wall and you're looking over the top of it, then you're potentially offending people downhill, unless you value the privacy and stuff that it's given. But if you were to build a wall that is offensive to you, but your neighbors look right over the top of, why would we even object to that? If aesthetics is what we're after.
Well,
Because you've done it to your property, and you affected your own resale, and the next buyer goes in eyes wide open that wall's.
Chairman Thomas,
Yeah,
Commissioner Mason, if I could,
I told you.
Or what if?
It's fine.
what's that?
I told you it wasn't gonna be a great idea. but-
No. I love your ideas. But I think we have to think of all of the scenarios that fit within the idea that you have. Commissioner Watson, on the north side of his backyard, has a 4 to 5 foot rock wall with a 6-foot vinyl fence on top of it. So that technically is an 11-foot wall between the uphill neighbor and Commissioner Watson. Is that acceptable? And if not, okay, it's consistent. But if we were to say that, okay, you can put up 5 feet of rock wall and then a 6-foot vinyl fence on top of it, creating an 11-foot tall visual barrier right on the property line. And that's okay. I find it very hard to say that because I don't like the look of concrete. And remember, I lived in a home with a 9-10 foot concrete wall that ran all the way along the backyard of my home there on 3300. So I have personal experience with living with a concrete wall. How can we say yes to one and no to the other? They're both 11-foot visual barriers to the downhill neighbor.
I think that the only argument that could be made, I think, because that's a valid question, would be the homogeneous nature of like solid concrete as opposed to, you kind of break it up when you have concrete and then vinyl fencing.
That's the personal perspective though, right? Because in the case,
Sure.
the downhill neighbors be okay with the concrete.
So what's your proposed solution, Councilman Swanson?
But my proposed solution remains what I mentioned in council meeting, that we look at what we allow to cover the bottom portion of the wall. I mean, the plans that it was read just a few minutes ago, Scott, you can reread it if you would, that the plan notes on the home in discussion said that the visible portion of the wall would be no greater than 8 feet. It didn't, to my recollection, it didn't say that the wall couldn't be taller than 8 feet. It says the visible piece. of the wall. So if it's covered by dirt, by rocks, by terracing, by a garden, by bushes, if we only have 8 feet that's visible, then aren't we meeting what was requested?
So on the downhill, who would be responsible for maintaining the bushes? The
Well,
person who built the wall?
It would be the person who built the wall. But again, with the discussion or the point that's been brought up, well, what happens if the bushes aren't taken care of 10 years down the road? Have you driven around North Ogden and look at the yards of many of the people that live in our city? Right?
Yeah, I agree with you.
We have landscaping put in.
Code
that
enforcement for
is-
landscaping and things like that, that's a whole separate issue. I think, you know, it's not that we want to make codes that make it more difficult to have code enforcement, but
Right.
again, we handle
Already-
things by complaint. So if you're supposed to have bushes to cover 4 feet of a wall and they die and they're not taken care of and the neighbor below says, I hate this 12-foot wall, you need to plant your bushes back. They complain to the city and then that brings code in. We don't drive around looking at
Right.
where there's things out. And then, because, for example, Mr. Pulver might dump gasoline on those bushes so they die because he wants to see 12 feet of wall. But he's not going to complain to the city. So, you know, that, I mean, I'm with you. Councilman.
Ultimately, I think we need to establish, are we talking about as the plans for this home stated that 8 feet wall can be visible when it's all said and done? Or are we saying that the total wall height can only be 8 feet? And then what do we determine that wall is? Is it only concrete? Is it rock with a 6-foot vinyl on top of it as well? We have to be consistent across the board, I think.
I think I'm kind of changing my tone a teeny bit because I think I'd be okay with the definition of visible, 8 feet of visible wall. And if it's covered with bushes, if it's covered with railroad ties.
No,
it
no,
wouldn't be
no,
a
I-
discussion.
Okay, but that's a, right.
Well, the
so
thing
we
is, that's the
can't
thing
cover
is,
it with
he
railroad
wouldn't put
ties, but we
railroad ties.
can.
But
Right.
many other people might.
We'd have to define what visible is, and it could be
Or-
shielded with I would say vegetation, landscaping, you know, things like that. And I wouldn't call railroad ties any of that, or 5-gallon buckets or whatever.
I would,
But the reason I'm okay with it, sorry to cut you off,
Go
is
ahead.
because that would have to be something that our landowner, that are the owner of the 2 feet, in this situation, we have a 2-foot area where he could put something. And that would have to be vegetation that fits in his 2 feet window. And I think, I don't know, I think I'd be okay with it.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yeah,
just in response to a few of those items, all of the walls are inherently taller than 8 feet because they vary a footing. At minimum 30 inches, just to get frost depth coverage on a concrete wall, so you don't get frost heaving. So you're gonna be 8 feet of exposed wall plus 30 inches of buried footing in any wall. And on a rock retaining wall, I mean, Eric built a bunch of these, but you got a 3-foot wall on the bottom, you probably bury half of that rock, or you stick it in the ground a
It
foot,
depends,
18
but
inches, but you.
boulder walls flow with frost up and down because they're not rigid
Yeah,
like concrete.
But you stick them in the ground with enough purchase that they're not gonna just slide out, right? And then, as Nate Davis had said, we measure from average grade. So it's not just visible wall, because I have the same concern. And we have some prominent Main Street, Washington Boulevard trees that are dying during a drought. And it is low on code enforcement's priority list to get, you know, some of these businesses to water their trees during a drought and landscaping dying. So when you have provisions from the council saying, you know, we're attempting to minimize landscaping water because we want to preserve, you know, conserve water as a whole, as a community. So relying it back to landscaping to me it's a solution that solves it on that day that landscaping is done. And then again, you could have a really obstinate neighbor that calls the city all the time because you got a dead bush. And now you've got 4 feet wide, a 3 foot tall of a boxwood bush that's died. And they want that thing replaced at that size because that was covering, you know, like I'm concerned about the downstream effects that will have. And then it's, again, someone in this office, either myself or building department or somebody at time of final occupancy, that has to go out and make a judgment call on whether or not Carl Forstner grasses planted at 4 inches tall, but will get 6 feet tall, constitute covering the bottom some portion of a wall. Like because I know how I would, I know what I would cover a wall with. It'd be water-wise grasses that are planted and then you cut them off and then they plant and, so there's interpretation questions there that I have about how we administer it. And I'm not trying to say that the right laws are only those that are easier to administer, but it's going to reduce these sorts of conversations over and over and over again if we get it right, hopefully one time.
Which they're not just conversations, they're also an expense.
Sure.
They are. Those conversations come at a cost.
And also, anytime I misspeak, we have Eric, our city engineer, here to please welcome and correct me.
So I got a couple things I want to cover before Brandon interrupts me again. I have the 5-foot rock wall is on my property. The 6-foot fence that's on that is also on my property. It's the benefits of being the last guy to build. And so the rock wall wasn't, anyway, I lose about 8 feet of property because the neighbor, whoever owned the property before me, was okay with the neighbor above me putting in this rock wall. So it's something that I consider, right? Is I'm now forced to live with something that 2 neighbors came together on. And I don't love it. In fact, I hate it, but I don't hate it enough to go after my neighbor and tell him, right? So I just wanted to say that. The other thing I thought of was, I'd be willing to move on that 8-foot rule to get rid of the idea of covering 2 feet of the wall with whatever, right? Because one person can say railroad ties, they like them, right? And one person can say railroad ties, I hate them. This looks really good. I have this in my front yard. It's really nice, but fits or bushes aren't, right? And if I cover that with 2 feet of fits or bushes, my neighbor's gonna go nuts, right? So again, it's legislative. So if I measure that, and tell me if this is crazy, but if I measure that from the footing and I allow 30 inches and then I say, how much, right, from the footing can I go up to be aesthetically pleasing? I'm willing to adjust that number if I measure from the footing, right? Because
Well,
that's
but the
something.
footing can be 5 feet deep in the ground.
Yeah.
That's the hard thing is,
It depends.
you may have,
Mhm.
like up here, there's many houses up on the bench that their walkout basement, we might have as much as 8 feet of wall below that basement because the footing has to sit
Okay.
on native ground.
I told you to tell me if I'm crazy.
Yeah,
So it's finished grade.
Yeah, so
So
I mean, it
has to
sounds
be
to me
finished
like
grade.
the ordinance as written is measurable,
Yeah.
right? It sounds to me like the problem is giving that building inspector some top cover to allow him to enforce it. So I'm just gonna throw that out there, but, I feel for this situation. But I don't think we can make an ordinance to fix this problem specifically. I think we need to step back and say, what is the right ordinance for our city?
And I think we boil it down, at least the feeling here, it all seems to come back down to aesthetics, because the structure side of it handles itself from engineering and from all of that. So then we look at aesthetics, and if that's the case, then we're right back to the beginning. Well, then what if you cover it and you're only looking at 8 feet of wall? And that's, as much as I don't want to dump things on the city and say, well, everything that we approve, site plans, landscape plans, everything. Day one, it's signed off, passed, everything is good. From then on, it'll either be maintained or go downhill. And that's just the nature of everything, regardless of whether we say it can be landscaping in front of it and say, oh yeah, it's an issue, and the neighbor complains because the bushes died. Is that, we have an ordinance somewhere that says you can only have 3 dogs or 2 dogs. People have 4 or 5, right? Where is it that it's like, we can't make an ordinance that says, oh, everybody can live with this one and they'll obey this, so let's make it this way. And And so but when it really boils down to aesthetics, then if that's the issue, if the whole reason we have this rule, and now I will back up one more level. This only has become an issue because we put it in an ordinance 2 years ago. We haven't had a problem with the wall. We haven't had things, issues with that until we actually made an ordinance to say, well, now we're gonna make it an issue.
Which is why we shouldn't do
So-
anything. We shouldn't.
I only say that because
No, I
sometimes when we
agree.
try to make ordinance and we just
Yeah.
add, I used to say that all the time. We've had previous planning directors that I felt like they just like to make red tape for us. Making ordinances, and not our current, so that's why I can say it previous. I've only been doing this for 10 years, so I've had 3 planning directors in the city that I've worked with. But, it's that. So what is the reason? I agree wholly with an ordinance to pertain to structure. It's important that walls are done right. I've seen a lot of walls that, although they haven't failed, I don't know why they haven't, because they're not built very well.
Yeah.
And, the wall that did fall, it was concrete. It was a structural issue. It wasn't, the neighbors stared at it so hard that it fell down because they hated it so bad, and so how do we, if it truly comes, if we all come to an agreement that this is an aesthetic issue, let's look at base. Are we comfortable that 8 feet is what we're all willing to say is visual? We don't want to cause more visual impediment than 8 feet of one solid wall. If that's what we agree, then we need to come up with a solution that, okay, what is agreeable to then cover anything beyond the 8 feet? And the only reason, Commissioner Mason brought up, I guess you would say property line walls or thereabouts were impeding neighbors versus not. One issue of, I would say, and maybe our building department would have to verify this, but 50% of the time when a wall doesn't meet, it exceeds its height in the city, at least ones I've looked at. They're either on the front porch, out the front, between the house and the street, or somewhere like that, that it is only that house. You can drive through the cove right now and see several homes where their front porch comes out of the house. And because the lot drops so much, they've got a retaining wall that's now a rock wall covering the concrete foundation of the house. That's sometimes 8, 9 feet tall, right at the front porch. Well, that exceeds our ordinance. But what are you doing? You're taking rocks to cover up a concrete wall. They're just addressing it from an aesthetic. They're not, it's not retaining, it's not really holding anything. Now, when it leaves the house, typically they all taper and get smaller and smaller. But there's a lot of them up there that in the front of the house, between the house and the street, that exceed what the ordinance allows. And that's almost out of necessity though. And, and now granted, being a builder, I know they can put the house in the ground a little further and eliminate that. It takes planning. And, like our one public mentioned, sometimes the builders just don't see A to Z and plan it that way. And all of a sudden they're doing something that's like, well, now we don't have a choice. So they do it and they realize. So how do we address that? One of the Mayor, I know you,
I've disclosed my problem here, so you're all aware that I can discount whatever I say here. I think it's really hard to legislate aesthetics, extremely hard. I think Nate has a real point, having seen what a lot of city officials are faced with. Whatever you decide, please make it as clear as you can so we don't get into these type of definitions. But I've always said, I said this in council meeting, the number one thing that I would hope the council and you as commissioners would address is the safety issue. That's, I think, has to be based upon what's safe on that downside and for other citizens. So
That seems like the easy part to me.
Engineering.
Because we just have to throw in there that it has to be engineered or.
well, and I would say, and this might be heresy, but look, it's realistic that some engineers will put that
Stamp it.
stamp on different things.
Yeah.
I've always said, and I've asked John to look into this, the city ought to have a list of approved engineers
That'd be great.
that can stamp things, because from my standpoint, safety is number one. And, you know, I'm not demeaning any, because we got CPAs that will sign off on anything too. But I just think that I would hope that the issue is based upon safety, and if an engineered wall is 12 feet or whatever, and it's properly engineered, I just don't know how you legislate aesthetics.
Yeah.
Because then now it comes to what's next in rock walls. Is it, you know, the type of shingles? Is it, you know, what goes next? So I would hope you just look at this in the whole picture, but the whole basis in my mind ought to be safety, whatever that is. And I don't know what size rock wall I got coming, so I don't know. But that's just my thought, is that it's just really hard.
I just to say, I love the idea of approved engineers for the city. I think it's fantastic. And I can see why that could be a slippery slope, but I think it would really simplify some of the safety stuff.
Everything in government slippery slope.
So Scott, can you clarify something to me too. You had mentioned earlier that it's measured based on the average final grade. What does that mean? Because does that mean if I've got, and is it the average final grade of the entire length of the wall?
Well, so right now the ordinance just says 8 feet, maximum 8 feet. But, so we don't use, there might be some minor averaging, but it's not as explicit as it is in the home side. So the home side, we use finished floor elevation, and we use the threshold of where you enter the house. So we measure at the front door, essentially where the front of the house is, or if it's a garage, you know, a separate accessory building, we measure at the width of that front garage door. So we don't allow, allow averaging this, you know, across the width that way, but not the depth, because depending on how the lot is situated, you could get a much taller building. But we also have more nuances in our single family homes, given that we have a maximum height of 35 feet, but then also a definition for an uphill lot and downhill lot, which allows you to go 40 feet on an uphill lot. That means that the curb is lower than where you enter the home. And then on a downhill lot is the instance, like the Mason Cove instance, where you have a rambler on the front and a 55-foot building on the back, and you can go 55 feet there to the back of the lot, essentially. So from the lowest point on the lot and as measured upward. So we give a little bit more credence or variability to homes, given that homes are also typically larger and occupy more space on the lot and have to deal with average grades across the length of them. The retaining wall is a pretty simple one. So one of the nuanced approaches is maybe we measure retaining walls on a true average of the exposed wall that you see, in which case, you know, I don't have it in front of me, but maybe the D's wall could meet that 8 feet on average, because you do have a significant portion of it that's 2 feet tall, you know, 2 feet exposed. So that was sort of a misspeaking, because we typically just measure the highest point of the wall.
I think there's an enforceability issue with going by the average, because you're not gonna know what the average is until you get to the wall already constructed, right? Then you have to, you're trying to fix the problem at ex post facto, like after the fact, if it, you know, if it's already been constructed, right? And then you're have more situations like what we're dealing with here. So unless you require an extremely detailed, you know, like visual depiction of the wall, like an elevation, just the same way that we get for homes, right? And I'm guessing we don't want to go there, but I just think from, you know, back to Nate's comment about enforceability, I think that's an issue to think about. If, you know, going by the average grade, if, you know, using that as a standard. So we have, with all of our building permits, we have topography, you know, contour maps that are given to us, right? And so we work really hard to make sure those are right, but that what ends up happening in the field is often very different. And this would be the extreme version of that issue. I would think, just based on my experience here at the city, and that you'd see walls that are going to come in saying they're going to be 6 feet, and you're going to get sections where they, you know, be 9, and you got issues if you're just going by that average grade. So
probably an unpopular opinion, but I personally don't have an issue with even setting our maximum at like 12 feet, because I think of situations like right next to me, for instance, we have a 10, 12-foot side setback on our yards, but somebody can park their, I don't know how tall they are, but 14-foot RV right against their property line and against the fence like I have. So I walk out from my house and I've got 12 feet, and then they're up 2 feet, and then a 14-foot RV. And honestly, it hasn't even bothered me. So like, I don't know. Again, you're just picking a number, but
I would agree with you if we did away with the foliage under the wall theory to cover the wall, right? Like I would say, I don't know that I'd be opposed to a 12-foot wall. I'm just really hung up on this whole idea of covering a wall to make it more aesthetically pleasing, because like to the mayor's point, what's aesthetic to you is different than me.
Fits
Right.
were great in the 70s.
I knew I had something with Fitzers. I saw you all sort of perk because I said Fitzers.
Now they just house the rats.
Right, but I mean, who's to say, right? Like a homeowner just wants to be a jerk and say, oh, you want me to do this? Here's some Fitzers. Right? What can I do if they're on just 2 feet of property?
So what
Not
if-
that you would-
What if we were now, I don't know if this goes against what Brandon just talked about, Bill, is, you know, the retaining wall, unless it is an actual engineered concrete wall, is never gonna be built the way the plan is when the building permit was issued. And if it is, if we look at it and say, well, if we're gonna measure as an average grade, and maybe, you know, this concern with the walls all seems to be between neighbors and property lines. I don't think anybody has issues with internal walls.
No,
Behind. That's really just an engineering side. Because it still needs to be safe. And so what if we end up saying, well, 8 feet still does seem to be the magical number, and say one single wall on property line cannot exceed 8 feet of showing, you know, from ground, from the final grade of dirt as an average for the length of the walls. So what if you have it 4 feet on one end and 11 feet on the other end? And your average is 7.5 feet of wall. You know, that to me, you're dealing with the contour of the ground if your property happens to slope that way. So somebody on an even grade slope isn't just gonna go and say, well, now I can do 11-foot wall all the way across the property line. Well, no, but if over here, your wall to get your yard up or whatever is only 4 feet by the road, and then there's a gully on the other side of the property, so now the wall needs to be taller on that side. Well, that seems to be, that,
It's a-
to the
it's an
neighbor,
infill problem.
what's that?
It creates an infill problem I can visualize.
An infill.
I'd have to draw it to show you, but like, let's say you,
Well, and I'm just saying, if you take that length of the wall and say 4-foot wall here and 11-foot wall there, and it's 100 feet long. you
yeah,
know,
I like where you're going.
On property line. Now, if you, and we could say, you know, a single wall, as long as it's engineered, could go up to 12 feet if it's stepped back 4 feet from property, you know? So in theory, it could be 2 walls, a 4-foot and 8-foot under our terrace rule.
Can I draw my
So-
concern? Because I like where you're going.
So it could be 12 feet at 4 feet in. If you terraced it, any wall can under a current ordinance. But if you want one single wall as a concrete engineered wall, 12 feet, well, you need to be on average 4 feet away from the property line or whatever. So we're taking care of that visual plane. We're taking care of on property line of saying, hey, you're not gonna treat your neighbor really bad. But
I think, I don't know if that's practical. I
Get the
can show you why.
I like the
Okay.
simplicity of it though.
Well, let me show you what you're gonna create.
complicate it up, go draw
Well, I mean,
something.
I just don't want to throw down something that sounds great here tonight, and then you try to make a subdivision and it's impossible. So,
Seems like it's a whole nother problem.
so we have a new subdivision coming in, right? And this is your downhill side, and this is your uphill side, okay? And the subdivision gets built, and this guy builds a house, 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 and this guy comes in, the hill slopes this way. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So we start here, and he's got a 4-foot, so this guy's building now, right here. He's got a 4-foot retaining wall that goes up to 11 feet, like in your example, okay? So that hill gets filled up. Now he's got a wall there that's 11 foot. How does this person develop their house? They've got to start with an 11 foot and go.
Well, they don't have to have their backyard the same level as their neighbor.
So what's going to happen? He's going to have to dig that out, and then this wall is going to be.
It might, just like lots of places. This neighbor's top of wall is here and this neighbor's top of wall is here.
Yeah.
And between them, you might have a wall that goes between the property line.
Yep.
That's 4 feet tall to step it down.
Don't forget, I
It
said.
doesn't have to
I see that all the time.
And we're in November.
Chairman Thomas,
be. Yeah,
a question on the average grade thinking. Whenever I hear averages, obviously you have to ask how many data points are we averaging? So you could easily see a scenario where you have someone that's got a 100-foot wall and the grade, ground grade to the top of the wall is 4 feet for all of it, but the last 10 feet. And then there's the gully kind of situation that Vice Chairman Mason mentioned, and it drops to 12 feet. So if we take 2 data points and say it's 4 feet at this end, it's 12 feet at that end, the average grade we would say is 8 feet. Or 8 feet. But in reality, it's 4 feet all the way across, all but the last 10 feet. And so do we require that a measurement be taken every 3 feet so that we get a more accurate representation of the true average?
well, I think not to complicate it, but the less data points you do, the more restrictive it's going to be. Meaning, if you said, oh, we're going to have 5 data points across that line that are 4 feet, and then all of a sudden you could have more 15-foot wall because you measured it that way. Versus if you took just one end and the other end and said, what's your average? Then I think that would limit you on how much could exceed 8 feet.
Except if you started at.
Right,
2,
but does that truly represent,
You average 2 feet.
does that truly represent the average grade of a slope? If in the scenario that I gave, sorry, let me close my door, my dog's barking. If you got, 90 feet, that's 4 feet high, and the last 10 feet drops 8 feet. Can you really say that the average grade is 8 feet? As the homeowner, I would say absolutely not. That doesn't represent truly what the average grade is along that back wall. It's an artificial number that is more restrictive and unrepresentative of what is actually there.
Yeah, I mean, that would have to be looked at, I guess. I'm just figuring out a way of how do you have a minimal amount that you would allow to exceed the 8 feet in circumstances where there might be a goalie or something like that.
Well, and you said something a minute ago, and you said it in our council meeting a couple of weeks ago, that has stuck with me since then, and you said it again tonight. We didn't have a problem until we passed an ordinance 2 years ago, and now I was on the council that passed that ordinance. And one of the questions that I think we have to ask as a council is, from a reflective standpoint, is an ordinance that we passed actually accomplishing what we thought it was going to accomplish? And if it's creating more problems than it solved, why do we keep the ordinance? If there weren't problems, and again, you can drive all over the city and see many retaining walls that are well in excess of 8 feet exposed. And it wasn't a problem. We created an ordinance, and now it seems like we have inadvertently created a problem that really didn't exist.
Yeah, that's why I would say, as it relates to height, in my opinion, the only regulation should be some sort of height line that triggers the necessity for engineering.
I agree with that.
And I'm okay, and maybe the issue is bouncing in between this 8, 10 foot, whatever, as a max height number. That seems to be the problem when it's so rare that they are taller than that. And say, well, because one, a rock retaining wall, which again, 90% of the walls are that in our city. Engineering has a difficult time getting that tall, you know, without having it be very sloped back, you know, meaning not very vertical. So then you get into the other engineered walls that are concrete and that make them taller. I mean, one thing that brought it up was, you know, that house that sits atop of 25 or 30-foot pea stone wall in Mason Cove. And everybody's like, ooh, do we want that? And it's like, well, the wall isn't the issue. The fact that the subdivision was approved as that a building lot was the issue. You know, if it was addressed at that level, maybe you wouldn't have a wall like that, but yeah, but other than, you know, maybe that's it. Is if we're really looking at the neighbors and say, well, you know, what's applicable?
So I'm seeing three options here, right? We either leave it, we make it bigger, or you abolish it. Right? Am I oversimplifying it?
Yeah, yes. I mean, even if we leave it, I believe the current ordinance says retaining walls, rock walls can't be more than 6 feet. And it is proposed that I think we just make those equal to whatever the height rule is.
Which I'm in favor of,
And so,
regardless of.
because again, down to engineering, if it's engineered, it's
Yeah.
built
Yeah.
right,
And I would,
why is it
to
treated
simplify
differently?
it, I do like the two things, engineered and a list of approved engineers. Like, I think that's a really important consideration. If we're really looking at safety, I think that will simplify it.
I think, I don't disagree with the list of approved engineers, but I think it complicates this issue specifically. I'd like to see us
Stick to this
take that
issue.
list of approved engineers at another, right, and because it's not core to, well,
If we're gonna abolish the rule and, you know, simplify something.
yeah, but I would hate to see list of approved engineers be baked into this specific ordinance.
I agree with
When,
that.
right?
I agree with that. I
When-
agree with that.
Yeah, so
But if
I,
we open up that can we do a list of approved builders in the city?
Right? And I think we can legally back.
Yes.
Sure.
Love that.
I want to do a list of approved drivers.
And you have a voter here that has a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So our city engineer, any wall over 4 feet has to be engineered. That's, we don't get to say over it.
So,
Right.
yeah, so the International Building Code recommends over 4 feet to be engineered. One of the comments I was gonna make about the approved list of engineers is basically to your point. We want to base a criteria on that because that would limit to a certain number of, we want to know criteria. So I would agree. I would discuss that in this meeting. So I think that's a short topic of discussion.
Sure.
Can I make a comment on that?
On what?
On the engineers, I think it's a great idea, but having worked at the state level and met with many cities, that's been shut down several times in court. So I think it's a great idea, because you know them and you work with them and you trust them. But that's a tough one to do.
Yeah, that's why I think it's a
Fair enough.
separate.
I think
separate
the only
issue.
way you get around that, you know, from a court standpoint, is you don't make a list of approved engineers, you make a list, like I've never proposed at the city level, but I would love to see a 3 or 5 strikes scenario with builders that say,
Sure.
we have proven problems with you this many times, you're no longer to be on building permits in the city. And that can be the same with engineers. Hey,
That
sure,
makes sense.
3 of your walls in our city have failed, you're no longer not allowed to engineer. That way you can limit engineering. But
That's, yeah. Yep.
they went to school, they got their
I
stamp.
would,
and
and
so
then,
that-
given that we've talked about this for nearly 2 hours, I propose we table that part and keep it on another agenda.
Yeah.
Because we could debate that on there too.
Well, let's circle back then. I mean, Commissioner Watson had said, make it bigger, abolish it, or.
Well,
My personal opinion is, going back to all this, if we have this problem because we set the rule. If we've got the safety issue taken care of, there has to be engineering.
And
I don't really have an issue with that.
sorry to cut you off, but we have people who can complied with it. So what message are we sending? Hey, we put this in 2 years ago. You guys had to cut your wall. Just kidding. I mean, that's
That's the nature of a rule.
Sure.
It was a rule for a
It's
period of time.
consideration for me.
You submitted your housing stuff during
Right.
that time.
I bought an
and that's
electric
it.
car because electricity was so cheap and now they're raising it up. So
Okay, but 2 years ago, we did have a public hearing and about this, and in other words, it wasn't made in a vacuum, although you could say maybe it was because nobody pays attention, and that's.
But we've learned it was made with intent. If it's not having the needed effect, there's nothing wrong with getting away with it. Or
Okay.
just.
In my opinion, I would say from the standpoint of when it was approved, it was created and presented. All the staff has changed, so it was created and presented by staff saying, hey, we need to make this, we made it, and now we have residents, we had the public hearing, nobody shows up, we pass it, we'll vote, and now we have residents come and say, hey, we have a problem with this. And so I would say, that, again, we created the ordinance, and now maybe it's like, hey, maybe we created something that was a little bit too, we didn't vet it enough. So do we need to address it that way? And that seems to be the common denominator, but I don't know what.
I'd be okay with reducing it, having something very simple engineering, something simple and not having it as.
I mean, no matter what,
complicated as-
like if we don't have a height rule, we're gonna have somebody come in and complain that the neighbor built a 20-foot wall on the property.
Yes, sir. That's
Could you
exactly
engineer
right.
Well, it's
engineer
fine,
20?
and
I
it's
mean,
fine
what-
to have a height.
That wall,
Yeah.
that house sits on Mason Cove, that's engineered, I mean, it's got a
Yeah.
house sitting on top.
Yeah, one of the best points made tonight was, we have a standard because 2's too small and 100's too big.
Sure.
And right now that standard's 8.
So let's put that stand. So if we're not gonna abolish it, because that's crazy talk, and we probably may not leave it at 8, then we need to decide on the number.
Pick a number.
Then we need to pick a number that makes sense.
Commissioner Webb, what's your number?
10.
Mason?
8 with
10.
provisions that I don't know how to enunciate that would be helpful in situations like.
So let's talk on
When I
property.
say 10,
On
10, no shrubs.
Okay.
8 because that's the standard and that's.
Okay.
all
Watson?
me.
You're saying from grade, right? From grade,
Final
no
grade at the
shrubs.
bottom of the wall, dirt.
10.
Commissioner Webb?
Probably really go 12.
Commissioner Mantel?
8.
8. Councilman Barker?
I'm here to get you guys' opinion.
Well, that's.
So,
Real quick.
We're recommended body.
I go back to, I agree with a lot of what the mayor says. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I mentioned this, I think, in council meeting. I had a friend that moved out of a home because somebody built a shed behind it. They didn't like their view was obstructed. The next people moved in because the shed was there and there weren't neighbors. You don't like rock walls because you don't want to maintain them. Somebody else might like rock walls because they like rock walls. You say don't put shrubs in.
So what's your
because-
number?
I don't have a number.
So
But
is
my
it-
point,
No matter how high, we don't. care.
no, we should care.
Well, but I'm
we
just
should
saying
care.
that.
What's the average, where's the average top of the wall before it starts to get excessive? Because like you said, you build a 5-foot wall and then you put a 6-foot fence on. We have a 12-foot wall, you have to put a fence on it. I mean, code says you're gonna have to put a fence on, so there's gonna be a fence going on top of it. Do we say after 12 feet, it has to be a see-through fence?
I don't want to go down fences.
Well, but we brought it up, that you put up a 5-foot wall.
But
with
that
a
again,
6-foot
that's
fence.
because we're looking at saying, oh, what's the visual?
Right.
What are we blocking visually? So
I would say 10 to 12 feet,
10 to 12
if I had to give a number.
Councilman Swanson,
On the low end, I would say 12 feet. Ultimately, I don't think that we should have a number simply based on the number of 20, 30-foot retaining walls that we have in the city that haven't been a problem, that have been built in the last 10 years or newer, and it hasn't been an issue. It hasn't brought neighbors in. It just hasn't been an issue. And I think I go back to Chairman Thomas, what you said. I think we created an issue by creating an arbitrary number, thinking that we were acting on behalf of the residents, when in reality, it turns out that I don't believe we have been. But if I had to have a number, it'd be between 12 and 15 feet. Although I would say that the ordinance should have a is it Eric? Is Eric there? Eric, our engineer?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Eric that I heard saying that international building code is anything over 4 feet needs to be engineered. That ought to be part of the standard that, you know, we have 30-foot walls that are fine, that are engineered. We have 6-foot walls that aren't fine, that weren't engineered. If you're over 4 feet, it has to be engineered. And if we're going to set a cap, 12 feet I could live with.
Okay. Councilman Delpas?
So I'm still stuck on 8 feet, and just kind of provide an example of why I am. My house that I currently live in right now, if you look in my backyard, I have a terraced wall, and it's, you know, approximately 4 feet high, and then it has the terrace and it goes up another 4 feet. And I currently have a property to the north of me that hasn't been built on yet. And I just have to imagine that the majority of my neighbors would probably feel the same that are on my south-facing part of the street on 3675 North. So if that lot or when it develops, because it will, of course, I think an 8-foot maximum would serve me the best and would serve the majority of my neighbors the best, because, you know, we already have a large incline that's behind all of the homes. And so if it's just going to keep getting higher and higher and higher. So if we say 12 or 15 feet, it just seems like it gets out of control. So I'm stuck on 8 feet.
Eric, how tall can you build a home and have it be safe?
Well, I think there are 100 and something stories in New York. So, I mean,
Honestly, a fire ladder that's tall enough.
I mean, I
Don't make
believe,
ladders that tall.
but I believe, you know, Councilman Barker, I believe the 35-foot rule in residential all stems from the fire department. Because most fire departments don't want to fight a fire taller than that unless they have a ladder truck, and most communities don't have ladder trucks. That's my understanding of where the 35-foot rule came from. Is that, it's true?
But we have
Accurate statement.
54-foot tall buildings down in Providence Point.
And North Ogden residents have said that one of the things they want in their community is walkability and open space. And that's where I'm coming from, is to preserve a feeling of.
I'm just trying to make the point, you have to have something that's reasonable.
Yeah.
You
So,
have no,
Mayor, I didn't get your vote.
I don't have one.
You don't want to.
You do tonight.
I know you had asked that. same because
Yeah, as
your
long as you
building, so-
understand my situation, I'm a safety person. And because I don't think you can legislate aesthetics. So I'm a safety issue, but I think you start getting a wall higher than 12 feet, it gets pretty ugly. Okay, but to me, it's all on safety.
And then so in my opinion, now, when I look at aesthetics, I also think of practicality as well. Now, just so everybody realizes, if you're gonna build a 10 to 12-foot retaining wall out of concrete, it's pretty hard to have your footing be even with the face of the wall. I would almost guarantee the reason his wall is 2 feet off property line is because you need a 2-foot footing past the front of the wall.
It's a 6
And you
foot.
can't, yeah, so you've got 2 feet on the front of it and 4 feet on the back, and I would bet. So you can't compete on your neighbors with footing. So naturally, it's gonna be off the property line a little bit. But I would say the same thing. I'm of the opinion 10 to 12 feet on property line should be sufficient. So if I look at that, just to recap, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
What's the average?
9, 10 of
And
us.
how many data points?
Yeah, there's 10 of us.
Mace is the goalie.
So out of 10 of us, 5 people are 12 feet, 3 people are 10 feet. Oh, maybe is there 11 of us, and 3 people are 8 feet. Sorry, there's 2 that are 10 to 12. So to give you an idea amongst our little polls here, that's what we're all comfortable with.
Because what was the average?
The average, if you would say the average would be about 11.2 feet.
To be exact.
Let's do that.
Change my number.
Let's do 11.2.
So, but just to consider that, all of us, our current ordinance is 8 feet. Amongst the poll, amongst all of us that are meeting tonight, we came up with just over 11 feet as an average that we'd be comfortable with. So that tells me that if we're having a height rule, then that should be somewhere where it is. Now, you don't, 11 feet's a weird number, so.
No covering the thing, I mean, just.
Yes.
Need to define the measurement.
Yes, if we're looking at saying, hey, what this is, people want to plant stuff in front of their walls, you know, have
Put on
it, but we're not.
Yeah.
Looking at that. So if we do nothing but just say, we're gonna change that rule from 8 to 11. Then that, we leave the ordinance the same, all the engineering applies. So as the ordinance would read now, we would say that single wall can be 11 feet tall if it's engineered properly. Rock retaining walls, do we leave them? Again, it's back to safety. Do we just leave it up to the engineer how tall a boulder wall can be? And just consider height as height rather than type of wall?
I think anything above 4 foot should be engineered.
No, that's in there automatically. But what I'm saying is, right now our ordinance says only 6 feet max on a boulder wall. It doesn't matter if it's engineered, you know, for a 10-foot wall, it can only be 6. So we take that restriction out and say, if an engineer can engineer an 11-foot boulder wall, then you can do that just as much as you can do a concrete wall.
I think they probably need to provide drawings.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So if we're the consensus that we treat all walls the same, meaning the height is height regardless of material, and an engineer has to, as the ordinance reads, anything over 4 feet, an engineer there has to be an engineered stamp.
3 strikes, you're out, Tim.
That's
Another day.
So, did we cover everything, Scott? I mean, that would seem to be the main thing.
And what are we looking for? We look for, is this just?
So this is a
discussion?
recommendation to the council.
Yeah.
But,
Not taking a vote.
yeah, just for
No, we would
commissioners.
vote on what our recommendations.
Sure.
You know, as commissioners, if we were to look back at it, say, our council that is here tonight, just 3 of you, right?
Yep.
2 are 12 feet, 10 to 12, 12 to 15, and 8 feet are their opinions. Our opinions were 10, 8, 10, 12, 8, 10 to 12, for 12. So 1, 10 to 12 was council.
Since I said 10 to
We
12,
won't recap the names.
I'll go with 11.
7.2.
Point 2.
Every point two.
So
we,
are you, our recommendation is adjusting height if I'm summarizing what you're asking of us on this agenda is we would treat all walls equal regardless of material. Height would be, if we have a motion, whatever the height is on the motion. Was there something else we needed to address?
no, that's it. So if we
That's
can
the
get
crux.
planning commission to make a motion.
It
for
doesn't say there's visible, somebody said that the current ordinance says visible.
Well,
8 feet of wall exposed beyond
exposed
the average
beyond
grade.
grade.
Yeah, but what does that mean?
It's
Because we
finished
got into.
We gotta be dirt, but do
Yeah.
we factor in anything of, I just think of finished grade of dirt. So
Yeah.
by the way, if we do that, you would measure this wall over here that's 6 feet, and it meets this wall over here that's 12 feet, even though there's only 3 feet, lineal feet of it, it doesn't meet. Somebody needs to cover the bottom of it.
And it sounded like when our inspector described that, he was very comfortable with enforcing that.
So it's good. I think regardless of what you do with your dirt on the bottom of the wall, if it's simply as 11 feet, if that's the number, 11 feet is the max, no matter where he puts that tape measure, it shouldn't exceed 11 feet.
We need to change the definition because it's grade. So if the wall is here.
Top of wall, yeah, exposed wall.
To top of wall.
Yeah. So that, that is, make that adjustment. Okay, if we've only talked about it long enough, I entertain a motion for recommendation for council.
Can you stomach one, Mace?
If you want a recommendation
Go
for 8
ahead.
feet,
Yeah.
I know no one's
go
gonna
ahead,
do
make
that.
I don't think I'm in.
No one's
agreement
gonna agree with it.
with- So
That's why.
I'm gonna be the world's, we're supposed to have the recommendation before I tell you how I vote, but I'd be the world's softest no. Simply because I don't think we should have a standard and keep moving, because someone else will come in and then it'll be 9 feet and then it'll be 14 and then, to meet these situations. So I don't disagree with the philosophy behind what we're doing, or I'm not gonna lose any sleep over that it passes, but I won't make the recommendation for that principle.
And I think there's a point here that really we all need to emphasize, including the city council. we need to understand why we're doing this, because this happens all the time. That somebody passes an ordinance, somebody comes in and complains, and we go, oh, let's just change that. And that is very, very frustrating to people who are trying to do their job. So I hope as we move into the future, we really understand why we're doing this, because I think Chairman Thomas, you know, you indicated, well, the planning guy, who liked ordinances, kind of talked us into that, right? So I would just hope to Brandon's point there that we understand why we're doing something, because it is very frustrating to keep changing the rules for no reason.
That's an excellent point, and I'm just kind of thinking back to Lauren's presentation, and it seemed like it was very safety driven. It didn't seem like it was so much aesthetics, why he wanted the 8 feet and the terrace, and it'd be curious to go back to those minutes, you know, and kind of.
Well,
get
I
that
think
discussion.
that is more those, that takes on the city as regulating the safety by saying, you don't need to get the wall engineered because we're gonna put the limit at X. Now we're taking the city out of it, saying, we don't care once you're over 4 feet, it's on you to
Yeah.
get it engineered, which is where it needs to be.
Yeah, I think eliminating that is important.
It's more, is it more of a safety issue when they're talking about the wall failing or someone falling off of it? I don't know. I mean, maybe that's why they terrace,
I
right?
recollect,
It
yeah,
slows
that's a
your
good
fall.
question.
That's a good question.
It is a
I mean,
good
I
question,
thought
but
about,
seemed
I thought
like-
about a 6-foot concrete wall on my property and I think, well, what's to stop somebody from just running right off a 6-foot wall?
It's not the fall that hurts you. It's you.
It's the land.
I don't think-
Right, so
But
is
is
that
it
a
a
safety issue?
But there is
Or
an
it-
ordinance that says so hollow or so tall of a wall, you do have to have a fence.
Yeah,
A rail, yeah.
Yeah, something,
So
something to
that's-
keep you don't. so you
that's a
don't-
separate ordinance then.
Right.
So it's not necessarily a safety issue, of someone falling off, but it's,
No.
we're really legislating, we're back to legislating aesthetics and deciding whether or not we like looking at a 8-foot wall or a.
So the only thing I would say, now, if nobody wants to give a recommendation, I would do it, but, no, I hate doing them, because I feel like I talk you guys into stuff, but, I would still leave it, so as of right now, we would say, we would adjust maximum wall height to 11 feet, all walls, including boulders, being treated equal. But I would suggest that we do still leave the maximum terrace height in there. So I believe it was 24 feet, right? So we can't do 3 terraces of 11 feet to get us to 33 feet.
Yeah.
I still think the max 24 feet is enough. So if
We'd
you
have
have
to, we'd have to add that in. That's just been an accepted, I mean, essentially that's just been accepted 24 feet. I don't think we've ever.
Oh, I thought we had a maximum of 3.
No,
terraces.
there's nothing codified. And then real quick, just, Cody, Commissioner Lawson, to your point, the only time we have a please don't fall off this wall ordinance is when it's on public property or adjacent to like a public trail or something, in which case your ADA rules about a 42-inch high crossbar or something, barrier would take an effect, but on private property, we don't legislate whether or not you're gonna fall off of your own rock wall or onto your neighbors.
Building code does regulate that if you have a walkway. next to it.
If there's a, correct, yeah, if there's a
But
walkway.
landscaping
Please don't
between the
fall off this
walkway.
wall ordinance.
Right.
Okay.
And kind of back to just generally on comments, Brandon a few years ago did write an ordinance about fences on top of retaining walls. And it requires either a setback for height or a transparency. So you can put a fence up on top, but it's gotta be like metal gated or chain link or something else. It's gotta be visible, see-through, or pulled back far enough that if it's a 6-foot fence, it's not impacting.
Just one clarification, but the ordinance does not, I don't believe it requires, well, it might, I haven't looked at it recently, but I don't think it requires a fence on top of a retaining wall.
No, it doesn't require it, permits it.
Yeah, it just sets the specifications if you do. Yeah.
Wow.
So I guess one last thing.
I've never railing on a deck.
I thought it was in the ordinance that we had a 3-tier max to be total of 24 feet. I mean, 3 8-foot tiers at 24 feet. Do we want to have a max overall retaining in a series? I
I would say no.
I mean,
Because I think
to start to get
topology.
into it, the engineering and photography is gonna probably look at that.
You have to have a lot of property.
To me, the terrace
Yeah,
itself
33.
takes care of the aesthetics we're trying to, and you
Yeah.
only have open space, so I don't care if they have 12 8-foot sections,
Okay.
if they have the land.
Okay.
So I would say no.
I'll go ahead and make a motion then that we recommend to city council that the overall height of retaining walls be increased to 11 feet. That's to also include boulder walls.
If you want to add the max terracing would be either at a specified height or the number of terraces.
If you want that, I'd say, I think it's important to describe, you know, the reason we feel the 11 feet is whatever the reason. We established 8 feet was established when the ordinance was created, and we feel like it's too many instances. I would put in there, I mean, too many instances, 8 feet just isn't quite enough when you're dealing with houses that have 9 to 10 feet of, you know, front porch area that has to be covered, you know, needs to be covered. Or even just simple things like that, but
Sounds great.
The reality is your 11 feet came from the straw.
Wait a
poll.
second.
That sounds more condescending than I meant it to be. Because that's where, but that is where your number came from, was what do you think, what do you think, what do you think? And so, you know, we're supposed to make decisions here based on evidence. And that is a piece of evidence that, right? So that was, we did a straw poll, that's some evidence, it's not great. The other evidence is we have 100% of our population here has spoken in favor of, hey, I don't mind an 11-foot wall. So that's a piece of evidence. So I'd have you keep all that in mind. I'm gonna vote no. But I'd have you keep all that in mind when making your vote, but you're supposed to do this based on evidence. So I acknowledge those two pieces of evidence as supporting your recommendation.
we have a motion.
I'm a complicated person. I know.
We have a second.
I do. Do we need to add in, I mean, this is just clarification before, and I might second it, but do we need to change the 4 foot, 6 foot rule in this recommendation as well?
The 4 foot, right, is already in code, I believe.
No, no,
4
it's,
foot, so it's engineering
Anything
requirement.
over 4 feet requires engineering.
and that's in there.
Right,
Okay.
Yep, with a maximum up to.
And then all walls treated equal, right?
No, I didn't. I don't care.
If you want to do 11 feet of railroad ties, as long as the engineer can figure out how to make that work.
So it's conflicted.
Lots of rebar down through every one of those.
Okay, we have a motion. We have
Second? I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
Such
I thought you
confidence.
already did.
No, I didn't. I was thinking whether I was gonna
This
do
is
it or not,
painful.
if you wouldn't have.
This is a recommendation. All right.
You can tell we have conviction.
Commissioner Webb. You vote.
Oh. Yes.
Commissioner Mason.
I'm a no. I'm the world's softest no, because I do agree with the philosophy behind why we're doing this. Okay, no.
Commissioner Watson.
Yes.
Commissioner Lund.
Yes.
Commissioner Nancarrow.
No.
I'll vote yes. So 4-2, we move on to city council's opposing recommendation change to 11 feet as the maximum wall height. Treating all walls equal as far as height is concerned. All right. Let's,
Commissioner
does anyone need to take a rest from break? Councilman Swanson?
Just a quick, can we have somebody follow up on the fence on top of the retaining wall in the ordinance? When I spoke with the homeowner whose retaining wall failed, when he built his home, he was told that he had to have the railing on top of the retaining wall for safety purposes per code, that he couldn't just have the retaining wall end, that he had to put on, it was either a 3 or a 4 foot fence on top of the retaining wall in order to meet code.
Might have been a path or something.
I'll look now.
I'm pretty confident that building code requires a minimum of a 42-inch fence or railing when there's I don't know exactly the distance, but I think it's a height drop of an average of 30 inches over so many feet horizontally. So I think that's where that came from.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I don't think it's everywhere, because I looked it up a while ago when I built mine, and it doesn't.
Okay, well, if he was told that, then it was most likely coming from an interpretation of the building code.
You mentioned the sledding that you could get off your lawn into yours. Like, it's like-
Christie does it.
Yeah.
Okay,
That is-
does anybody need to take a break before we tackle the next item?
I move we take a small break.
Okay. We can take a 5-minute recess. I believe city council, you're not, it's not combined for the next item, right? So we'd like to thank and excuse our city council and mayor for coming tonight on our night.
Thank you, commissioners, for your hard work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. We'll see you.
Thanks, Jamie. Whatever was said. Satisfied, really. I didn't know how to. pronounce it. I was even thinking, could we? Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I asked you what I did earlier, so I was wondering. and this is- Yes, they have it somewhere. And they're just a super low maintenance. There's no trying to get a copy of it.
That's cool.
I hope this, I mean, who knows what the city council decides. but I hope that-
Yeah, I know.
And I probably see all the other commissions that-
Guys, really good reasons why you're closed. Yes. And then I'm gonna none. Why?
These are,
I still-
oh, you mean this one here? I'm sorry.
I still think you would-
This is the aesthetics. We'll see what it is, never be finished. And you can see the micro cracks.
No, and I look back.
But these are.
That's how it's down.
No, I see how far.
So I have a wrong wall.
Bring the right there. The funny thing is, I would leave down at the south part and just slowly go by, and I just kind of wave out.
So. Tread light.
That's the trend. It's not your neighborhood. This is the trend.
have a hard time.
Yeah.
I wonder if we added up the number of hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I usually not like a super like. Imagine the amount of time, you know, planning departments have this. It's so bad.
Yeah.
You have an engineer. I just can't figure it out.
Right.
It's just.
Those ones are like, there are gonna be vendors.
Water.
Well, I'm not sure. I think it's in your calendar. I think I could.
Thank you for your good work.
I don't imagine that.
Yes, you will.
All the walls I've walked in. Color, I mean, those are serious color. I am serious. It cost me $100 to keep it. I'll take one. I'd love to look at that.
We actually do need one.
I didn't show it. That's the only ones I showed right there.
Okay. Well, then here's the one.
Don't, just for fun. Okay. But these are some of the walls you described. And I talked to them, and I won't involve them. But I
See, they're great.
property
They
owners.
get this call, but then you cut them down.
That's what I was doing. Obviously. They're most all, it's fine.
Yeah, just.
I hadn't been trying, but it hated my walls.
Well, that's the whole thing, like, councils.
Well,
We never had an interest, so we make one.
and I did have a.
People didn't come in and complain that the neighbor's wall was too tall. Here's the ones that were. Thank you. There's one wall there.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Why does that matter?
Right.
It's below.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know this has been a thorn in your side.
Why took some rest today?
Absolutely.
I don't know
I guess that was a choice.
That's the hard.
That's the thing about the.
Hey,
neighbors, is
if I
that
didn't
you're the
love
first
this
person.
city,
A year.
Yeah.
someone drive me nuts.
So I do that all the time.
But I do,
Are these the structures supposed to be hybrid? No, but they're in Katy, I think our office is probably locked. They're actually.
I didn't want to
Nice.
I didn't think that.
Sweatshirts are great.
I know.
Very.
I like
Right. Well, that's in the river. And then after our mission, we're not mission.
Yeah.
So it's
The slope.
George.
It is.
Thanks so much. Appreciate your help.
Good luck.
Just like. Right, it looks good.
Sure.
All right, let's get to it so we can go home. Are we still recording? Stop. All right, legislative item number 7. Zone text amendment 2022-10. This is a public hearing to consider a recommendation on a legislative amendment to revise the language related to public improvement guarantees in Title 11, Chapter 23 of the North Carolina Code. Our presenter is our associate planner, Brandon Bell. Brandon?
Good evening, members of the commission.
Sorry, we did have a member of the public who endured through the 2 hour of that. She may have been here for this, I don't know.
She's been at all, we're attending all night once.
Is she online?
Okay. No, she was sitting here. I was just making sure that she wasn't here for this. Go ahead.
Okay.
I was gonna go home and see, ask her if that's what she was here for.
She was at city council. I didn't know.
Okay. Okay. I hated to see her sit here for 2 hours and then
Yeah.
miss the 5 minutes.
Like, I gotta
Sorry, Brandon.
That's okay. So this is a legislative decision. I'll go ahead and read the legislative decision statement. When the city is considering a legislative matter, the planning commission acts as a recommending body to the city council. The city has wide discretion in taking legislative action. Examples of legislative actions are general plan, zoning map, and land use text amendments. These legislative actions require that the planning commission give a recommendation to the city council. Typically, the criteria for making a decision related to a legislative matter require compatibility with the general plan and existing codes. So this is a very simple proposed text amendment. When we did the code update, when that passed 6 or so months ago, our guarantees for improvement, like financial guarantees to ensure the quality of public improvements like the roads, curbs, et cetera. They were intended to apply to all zones, but for one reason or another, when it was put together by the consultant, there was an error in the text that currently communicates that it is only limited to the HP zones. And so this is mainly, the main purpose of this is to just change the title and the purpose statement so that it applies to all development in the city, not just those zones. There is a secondary purpose, which is to remove one current option for improvement guarantees. There's 3 or 4. There's a performance bond that's available, or a deposit in escrow, a letter of credit. But the fourth option, our city attorney has recommended that be removed from the available options. State law requires that that the city allows more than one option. You can't just have one option. But we currently have 4, and this would reduce us to 3. But our city attorney is of the opinion that it's not a highly desirable method. Option number 4, which is lien agreements.
Off topic, are we allowed to close the doors in a public meeting?
There's no requirement that they need to be open,
Oh, okay.
to my knowledge.
One time we tried that and we got yelled at.
I just didn't, I couldn't hear him.
I couldn't either.
A bunch of
Yeah,
people
I
out
agree
there
there.
chatting.
Do you want me to go out and tell them to be quiet?
Okay, I just want to keep the.
No, it's a
perception. People
fair,
can
it's a
walk
fair
in.
concern. Obviously, we want to,
Yeah,
follow the rules. and
because it
do
does say
it.
don't shut. it.
Yeah.
It's the open access to the meeting that it's trying to.
So
It's actually fire code.
We don't have because of the whole civil site protection zone of this building.
Moving.
okay, so the fourth option that is being proposed to be stricken from the available options in the city is a lien agreement, which is essentially that as lots are sold that, portion of, that the city holds a lien on those options, and the city would, or on those lots, and that money would be taken from the sale of those lots and put into an escrow fund. There's multiple problems with that. The first is that the money's coming after the sale of the lots, and so it depends on the success of the sale of the lots, right? But then they're also less likely to sell if you don't have the road in, which is what the purpose of the improvement guarantee is, that it's in and constructed correctly. And so the city, they don't become an investor in the subdivision, but they're held hostage in a sense to whether the subdivision, is successful in selling. So I think that's a relatively accurate summary of John Call's concerns with it. The other, I think another issue is just that it gets messy, because there's going to be a lien holder on those lots that would take priority over us if there was a financial problem in a development. It's probably going to be going to the proceeds of any sale, are going to be going to the bank, and whatnot, above the city. So there's, let me just make sure I've covered everything. There's nothing in the general plan that was determined to pertain directly to this issue. We consider it to be a pretty safe, no nonsense proposed ordinance amendment. There is a related goal that you could interpret as related in the general plan that's states maintain and improve existing infrastructure. This is more, tiered towards future infrastructure, but they are related. So, and we're proposing this text amendment at the request of the city attorney. So the planning department staff recommends approval of the proposed text amendment as a means of adjusting city code to ensure that improvement guarantees are required for all public improvements approved as part of development. And staff further recommends that the planning commission consider if there are any appropriate adjustments to the proposed ordinance, and if they are in support of the proposed adjustment or not. Yeah, that's pretty much.
Okay. Thanks, Brandon. Any questions for Brandon? Do we have any discussion on this? Clean up.
Move we approve the item as written
I'll second
by
that.
staff.
We have a motion and a second. This is a recommendation to city council.
I
We
mean,
do need to have a public hearing, so let's go ahead and open the public hearing.
We need a motion and then we'll.
Huh?
No, go ahead.
So the public hearing is now open for zone text amendment 2022-10. Consideration and recommendation to amend the improvement guarantees in Title 11, Chapter 23 of North Arkansas Code. If you'd like to address the commission, please step up and do so at this time, or raise your hand on chat. type of comment in Zoom.
We have no more attendees online.
Okay? Make a comment, so make a motion, entertain a motion to close public hearing.
And then we close the public hearing.
Second.
We have a motion, a second, to close public hearing, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, any opposed? All right, public hearing is now closed. Discussion and recommendation.
I put a piece of chocolate in there. I move we recommend the city council the stuff that Brandon said. And is written in the staff.
I'll second that.
Duh.
I'll second.
We have a motion, and a second.
Al Johnson is the second.
Yeah.
Commissioner Watson,
Yes.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Carroll,
Yes.
Commissioner Webb,
Yes.
Commissioner Mason,
Yes.
and I vote yes. All right, a positive recommendation goes on to the city council. Again, public comments, item number 8. Anybody would like to address us? We have one public here,
Two.
public here. All right. Remarks from planning commissioners, any remarks?
I always love it when we have.
No debate?
No, I hate those.
Split
but-
votes.
Split votes, yeah, and various thoughts, and I thought I thought everyone that participated in the discussion had
Yeah.
great points, really, I thought.
You know, I thought about something that come up that I'd like to put in there, but it's too late now. I don't necessarily want an 11-foot wall on public right away. Like a sidewalk.
Yeah. Dang.
That
That is
would
a
probably,
big.
that might be one of those cases where we have the additional.
So maybe bring that
study.
up in with city council, that something to address that we don't have 11 feet right against the city sidewalk or
I also-
public right away.
I'm really surprised that there isn't, and maybe there is, but there's a gray area as to what's on top of that 12-foot wall or 11-foot wall. You know, I mean, what's to stop a kid from walking off of that thing?
It's possible, that's a good building question, and I'm not the building official or
Okay.
building inspector.
I know with me, I'm always what they've said on retaining walls. Is if you have landscaping between where people are walking and the wall, then you know, required to put a fence or.
Yeah.
I looked it up too, but it has something in there that it depends. And so it really
If it
depends.
can be deemed as a walkable area, it's-
That's what's surprising to me, and maybe something, I guess my official comment would be, we should look into that.
I think we should create a policy that 2 years later, we're kind of.
Hey. Never mind.
and to be clear,
My official comment is never mind now.
Brandon had mentioned when we passed the ordinance about a fence on top of the retaining wall. After walls this tall, we have to have a see-through, was it 90%? Is that what it is, or? It ends up being like wrought iron fence or.
Yeah.
Something that people can see through. I appreciate the conversation we had tonight. It's a tough one, and it's like, we have, you know, the public with us that through this whole thing are the only ones that have said anything, and they are in favor of unlimited height. I mean, but at the end of the day, the hard thing is on a property line, it's so much different than internal, but yet we have an ordinance that's trying to cover both of it.
Yeah. I
And
was
just
trying
like
to,
my comment now is, one 11-foot sidewalk, 11-foot wall right next to a sidewalk, you know, that would be a little.
I still think there's some kind of setback, like a fence rule, you know, like the fence I was talking about, because if it's aesthetics, it's really about the view. I mean, it's not a 12-foot wall, it's what is that 12-foot wall blocking,
A
right?
30-foot house.
A 30-foot house, yeah, I mean, really.
I don't think it's a view, because we're okay if you put 30-foot trees up. It's not the view.
It's the
preservation.
perceived aesthetic
Yeah,
of
it's a-
protection of,
There's a difference
protecting a
between
view.
a tree and a concrete wall.
You know, one thought is, and maybe this is as much for you, Scott, as anybody else, is, you know, next year when we're kind of looking at our training options, I mean, it does seem like, yes, it's hard to legislate beauty, but it seems like we can use some more training on that. Because it's a hard topic. It really is.
That's why we are who we are.
Yes,
None of us are professionally trained in this.
totally.
We're supposed to be representing the public and
And
say,
I-
hey,
yeah.
what do we want? because those are the standards that.
And that fact was
That is
represented in
beautiful.
previous training. But I think this is an area, as North Ogden continues to evolve, the more training that we can get
Now take this and make
in
it
helping to
solid.
understand the nuance of that, the more robust and forward-thinking planning that we will do as a group. And I think we did a great job tonight on that. But thinking about training in that area would help inform us.
Okay, agreed.
Agreed.
But the mere fact that you're not a professional in that
It's
area.
great.
Yeah, you're supposed to just represent. I mean,
Totally.
It's nice to have a blend. Eric's the most valuable one on our
Yeah.
commission because of his experience.
He used to be, I don't know that he is as much anymore.
No, because he had.
This is knowledge.
Because it's his
Yeah.
profession.
Like this structure.
Right?
But all the pressure, but he's biased, he's a developer.
Yeah.
He's an evil developer.
Okay, but the fact that some of us have think that walls should be 8 feet high and some think they should be 15 feet high.
I love our
That
straw
represents,
I think the straw poll is, that's, go ahead.
no, it's.
I
it's
interrupted
proportional.
you,
It's
you
evidence.
owe me one.
No, I guess I talk too much. I'm learning
Who said
here.
that? Who said it?
All right,
Johnson
no
said
more, no more,
I would never. say
no more
that.
comments from me.
Any other comments? Scott, you have anything for us?
The city Christmas party is coming up. I believe that's on the 6th of December. It's the first work session night. The vote is the 15th of November. We're not gonna hold a city council that night, so the city recorder will be validating the ballots that come in, so just be aware of those. And then we will let you know what the schedule looks like for the rest of November with planning commission meetings and December with planning commission meetings. But as of right now, I think that we're set to hold all of those meetings. I don't think any are canceled. I think that's all that I have from planning director.
Okay, our next city council, our next planning commission, oh, no, never mind. I was looking, oh, no.
It'd
I
be
was
on the
thinking it was the
16th.
day before Thanksgiving. So fun.
Yes, the next will be the 16th. And we'll expect this discussion to be on city council likely on the 22nd of this month, just so that we don't miss it and have it bleed over into December.
Yeah, they don't need to wait for the minutes because they were here.
Correct.
So, okay, any other comments?
I do have some comments under item 10. So I wanted to share with you that this is actually my last meeting for here at North Ogden City. I've accepted a position at Pleasant View City as their planning and zoning administrator.
So
So
can you back up to the verse? What did you say?
I wanted to share with you that this is my last meeting. So
man, but you're gonna be
Congrats.
Pleasant View.
I'll be, yeah, I've accepted a position at Pleasant View.
Congratulations.
Congrats on the promotion. I'll miss you, man. I've
Oh,
enjoyed
yeah.
working with you.
I appreciate that. So it's been great working with each of you and I appreciate the opportunity to have been here in North Ogden City. And I think there have been, a lot of great deliberations about, the right ordinance, and it's heartening to see that. I think that, the process of crafting laws as a republic, I know that it is part of our republic. I know that it's, I know that it gets messy. I know that you have long conversations, but there's a lot of, I was talking to some coworkers today, and I just said that, you need to think, you get a lot of opposition in the public realm, right? And that's to be expected, and it's understandable because people should be participating in the public process. But there's so many problems that you present by having those good, hard conversations, right? And those, you're never going to know how many problems that you address or solve or prevent just simply by the nature of the work that you're doing. That if you're doing, creating great laws, you're preventing them, and so they're preventing a lot of fights. So that's why I'm in planning, because I think it's important to make sure that we're making the right rules and laws and regulations and looking out for all parties that are affected at the same time. So it's been a privilege and honor to work with you, and it's a great commission, and I'm sure you'll continue to do great things in the future. So thanks for my time here, and hopefully we'll keep in touch and whatnot. So thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
on your
Yeah,
job.
thanks, Brandon. Well deserved. Very well deserved.
Appreciate that.
I agree.
We say that right in our, I'm not applauding.
you want to make a
Meeting's over. Now we'll allow it.
You can can suspend the rules if you want.
Spin that rule momentarily.
I'm a purist. I will not apply.
The question is.
Yeah,
do
you
or
are.
not?
He'll give you 2 reasons why you should apply, but he won't.
Well,
It'll change his vote at the end.
I mean, congratulations on your new position. That's a really-
Sorry, that was.
Thank you.
All right. We have a motion to adjourn,
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Guys, you want me to cut it off?
Yes, you can really